Welcome back to my series. Together, we're watching every Best Picture that the Oscars have awarded. If you haven't already, check out the last two videos and go and watch the first two Oscars. I started this series to watch more older films, and I'm so pleased with the results so far. I mean, I'm literally 3 movies into this series, but the things I've learned and the movies that I've watched have really been rewarding. I didn't know anything about the Oscars, so going through these and finally recognizing a movie within the first 3 movies was surprising to me. That's right, the third movie to win the Best Picture was the 1930 film All Quiet on the Western Front. When I saw that this was the next movie, I was excited. I've never seen this movie before, but it was hard not to be aware of this. Though I didn't read in school, All Quiet on the Western Front was one of those books that were always on rotation in English class. And in 2022, the remake came out to Netflix. I remember seeing it everywhere. I also remember thinking to myself, I wanted to watch the original before I watched that one, so I let it slide by me. Sure enough, I started this challenge and I finally sat down and watched both of the films. In this video, I will focus primarily on the 1930 film, but I'll make some references to the 2022 film. Starting out, this movie was directed by Lewis Milestone. At first, I felt like I'd seen this director before. And this is a new feeling, because the last 2 directors were a mystery to me. I mean, even the actors I had no clue about. So when I noticed this man, I had to know how I knew this guy, and sure enough, when I was looking into the first Oscars, this man won the Academy Award for Best Director. His 1927 film, Arabian Nights, which was another World War I film. The interesting thing about that film, that was more of a comedy. To go from that to All Quiet on the Western Front is an interesting dichotomy, and the fact that the Arabian Nights and Wings, the first Best Picture winner, and this movie were about World War I and highly successful, says something about this time and the people's wants to see the World War stories. Growing up, the vibe around movies or video games was definitely more World War II. Not a lot of World War I films or video games and things like that. The longevity of World War II in the American world is pretty interesting, especially when thinking about the difference in the 2 wars. Of course, my knowledge of old cinema is through these Best Picture lenses and a little bit of research, but I'm already wondering when the shelf life of World War I movies are. That was a little tangent, so let's get back to the movie. Specifically, the cast. The lead role was played by Lew Ayres. This was only his second credited film. His first film was in The Kiss that came out in 1929. He had a long career after this film, even getting a nomination for Best Actor for his role in Johnny Belinda in 1948. And during World War II, he served as a medic. Initially, he was actually a conscientious objector to the war because of his religious beliefs, but a Hollywood actor not joining the war was kind of a big scandal. Lew Ayres diffused the situation by getting approved to be an army medic. He served for 3.5 years and was awarded 3 battle stars. Something that is interesting about the last movies about war, Wings and All Quiet on the Western Front, is that a lot of these actors played a role in World War II. The actors could not have known their movie was going to be sandwiched in between 2 world wars, but the connections of these World War I movies to the actual World War II is crazy to think about, being a person that was living in the time. Let's talk about the movie. What a great movie. The imagery in this movie is incredible. Something that I keep thinking back to, and one of my favorite themes in the movie, is the journey of the boots. Of course, you have the disemboweled hands on the barbed wire, that very famous scene, or the final scene reaching for the butterfly, but the journey of the nice boots really struck a chord with me. These boots, highly sought after, get worn by so many soldiers that die. It was almost like the boots were cursed or the Grim Reaper. Soldiers were so excited to wear them only to be cast aside by the war. The only thing that carries on is these boots. The mentality of taking boots of a dead soldier and thinking they won't need these anymore strikes a contrast to the imagery that the movie plays. The movie seems to make an answer to those that are getting their boots taken. They won't need these anymore, the soldier says, but the movie answers, yeah, sure, but how long until you won't need them? I think this movie delivers on this kind of imagery and really sends the message of a generation of humans swept away by a war for a few feet of land. I was immediately captivated by the beginning scene with the crowd cheering and the professor giving such a passionate speech. The students were so eager to join, so sure of victory and glory, even pleading with a classmate to not get left behind and join. The shot from going from the outside to the inside of the classroom was also great. And then, when they get brought to training, the flowery illusion of grandeur is shattered. Granted, they blame this kind of on their training leader and not the war. They still don't know war, acting like children when they get, put a sack over the training leader and thwack him with some branches. But when the war finally arrives for them, it's jarring. The rest of the movie, the audience and the squad have to contend with the consistent barrage and death around them. The sound of this movie was brutal. It hurt my ears, and that was the point. Us, the audience, along with the actors, were accosted with loud, sharp noise from the artillery at all times. The first time I heard it, I was taken out of the movie thinking, what was that? But as time went on, it just clicked for me. Sound was still new at this time, and a lot of the actors were coming from a silent era. The fact that they were able to use sound in such an effective way was very impressive. I also really loved Corporal Cat's character. The grumbled veteran who has lived through it all and becomes good friends with Paul and the other members. You can see how as the new recruits get killed one by one, Corporal Cat gets so grizzled. The youth of his country are getting thrown into a meat grinder, and he survives on with his buddy Paul. That leads us to Paul, the main character. His journey throughout this movie really encapsulates the tragedy of war. How excited he was for war, how scared he was at arriving at the front line, how terrified he was underground with dirt falling on him from the barrage, and how good he felt after getting, a double serving of food because of so many of his comrades were killed. And then losing his friends, being injured, being sent home, and seeing how no one is aware of how bad things are and his eventual death. This arc could be a life cycle for any of the soldiers in this war. I think back to the final scene where all the young soldiers are looking back while marching, all to the backdrop of the graves in which they now lay. This was Paul's story, but it could be applied to those millions of soldiers who were sold the idea of nationalism and glory. And Paul was helpless to try and turn the tide. When he returns home for a while, he tries to express himself to his teacher and the young students, going against the notion that all is well. And he ends up getting criticized for it, and his words fall on deaf ears from his students. Another scene I want to talk about is the French soldier in the crater, because I feel like the acting was a little over the top, but it still gave its message off effectively. With everything going on around him, Paul's world is reduced to a crater with a dying/dead enemy soldier. He kills out of desperation only to feel regret, begging for the forgiveness from a dead man. That scene was unforgettable. Listen, I could talk about every little detail in this movie, but I won't. If you have a little detail you loved or something stood out to you, leave a comment. This movie did a great job at portraying war, and I was so glad I got to watch this along this journey. It seems that the Oscars love World War I movies, but I mean, those two movies have been great. I would recommend this movie to movie lovers and put it on a list of must-watch from the past. Before we end things, I feel like I should talk about the 2022 version of All Quiet on the Western Front. I say I feel like it because if you're considered only watching one version of the film, I kind of want to make sure that I feel like the one version you should be watching is the 1930 film. I don't think the 2022 version had the same effect on me as the 1930 film. First, the music for me took me out immediately. I felt it was a weird decision for that electronic music. It was a weird combination of foreboding/hype for an action movie that I don't think really fits with this film. Though almost 100 years older, I thought the 1930s film worked so much better with sound, from the guns to artillery. I thought the opening of the 1930s film was also a little bit more effective. The 2022 version opens up with a battle. We don't get that journey with the main character into the realization of what is waiting for him. We are immediately shown war and then jump back to Paul. I also thought the side story of the secretary was not very compelling and kind of took away from Paul's story. I can see how it was trying to portray the higher-ups and how the war affects the common soldier differently, but I don't think it did it quite effectively. I noticed the little details of the generals complaining about the staleness of bread or in the drinking of tea or eating fancy meals. I just think that Paul's story was better illustrated from Paul's point of view. That was my thoughts on that version. I want to reiterate that you should see the 1930 film if you haven't. And that concludes this video. If you liked it, leave a like. If you have something to say, leave a comment. We're on our way to the fourth Oscars, where we'll be watching the 1931 film Cimarron. I've never heard of this film, so I'm excited. Have a great day, and I hope you see a good movie this week.